The massive Zalari ships hung in the dark space above New Birmingham like silver tears ready to fall. Their engines hummed with the power that had once seemed like salvation to humanity. Now, those same engines prepared to carry their protectors away forever. Ambassador Kethvia pressed his six-fingered hand against the cold metal of the observation window. Below, 40 billion human souls lived their daily lives, unaware that their fate had been sealed in the sterile chambers of the Federation Council. He had argued for 3 days straight, his voice growing hoarse as he pleaded for his people to reconsider. The humans had been their responsibility for 3 centuries. They had lifted them from their primitive world, taught them to walk among the stars, shown them wonders beyond their wildest dreams. The decision is final, Admiral Morthen said behind him, his voice carrying no emotion. The Devourers return from the void. Our resources are limited. We cannot waste them on worlds that offer no strategic advantage. Captain James Mitchell stood in the corner of the room, his human face twisted with something Kethvia had learned to recognize as controlled rage. The man wore the blue uniform of the Human Defense Corps, an organization that existed only because the Federation had allowed it. His ship carried weapons that the Federation had provided, flew with engines the Federation had designed. Now all of that would mean nothing. 300 years, Mitchell said, his voice barely above a whisper. 300 years of loyal service. We fought in your wars. We died for your causes. We trusted you. Dr. Emily Watson clutched her data pad so tightly her knuckles had turned white. She had spent her entire life studying the ancient threats that came from the dark spaces between galaxies. The Devourers were real and they were coming. Every few million years they emerged from their sleep to consume entire civilizations. The Federation had survived their last visit only because they had been smaller than, weaker. The mathematics are simple, Admiral Morthen continued, pulling up a holographic display of human space. 12 worlds glowed like tiny candles in the vast darkness. Your colonies are scattered. They cannot be defended efficiently. The resources required to protect them could instead protect core Federation worlds that house billions of our own people. Emily looked up from her data pad. What about evacuation? You have the ships. You could take our people to safety. The Admiral's expression did not change. 40 billion refugees would strain our resources beyond acceptable limits. They would require food, shelter, integration into existing colonies. The social disruption alone would be manageable if you actually wanted to manage it, Mitchell interrupted. Kethvia turned away from the window. In all his years serving as ambassador to the humans, he had grown to understand them in ways his own people never could. They formed bonds that went beyond logic or efficiency. They would die for strangers, fight impossible battles, refuse to abandon hope even when hope seemed foolish. These qualities had always puzzled the Federation Council, who saw them as primitive emotional responses. There must be another way, Kethvia said. Some compromise. There is no compromise with extinction, Morthen replied. The Devourers do not negotiate. They do not show mercy. They consume everything in their path until nothing remains but empty space and cold stars. We barely survived their last visit when we were united. Divided, trying to defend scattered human worlds, we would all fall. Through the observation window, Kethvia could see the lights of New Birmingham cities. Millions of families were sitting down to dinner, helping their children with homework, making plans for tomorrow. They believed in the Federation's protection because they had never known a world without it. Their grandparents remembered the old stories of Earth, of wars and hunger and fear, but those seemed like ancient history now. Mitchell walked to the window and stood beside Kethvia. How long do we have? The advanced scouts will arrive within 6 months, Emily said, consulting her data. The main force will follow within 2 years. Maybe 3 if we're lucky. And you're certain we can't fight them? Admiral Morthen made a sound that might have been laughter if it contained any warmth. Captain, your entire species has been under our protection for 3 centuries. Your weapons, your ships, your technology, all of it comes from us. Without Federation support, you barely have the capability to defend against raiders, let alone an extinction-level threat. But Kethvia noticed something the Admiral missed. Mitchell's expression did not show the despair that would have been logical. Instead, there was something else there, something that reminded Kethvia why he had requested this assignment all those years ago. The humans called it determination, but it went deeper than that. It was the same quality that had let them survive ice ages and plagues and wars on their homeworld before the Federation found them. When do the evacuation ships leave? Mitchell asked. Evacuation is complete, Morthen said. All Federation personnel and assets are being withdrawn immediately. This conversation is a courtesy, nothing more. As if summoned by his words, the evacuation sirens began to wail across New Birmingham. The sound echoed through the observation deck, a mournful cry that would soon be heard across 12 worlds as the reality of abandonment became clear. HFY watched the first transport ships begin to pull away from the orbital stations. Each one carried Federation citizens and equipment back to the safety of core worlds. Soon, the humans would be alone in the darkness, facing an enemy that had ended civilizations for longer than their species had existed. But as he watched Captain Mitchell's reflection in the window, HFY began to wonder if the Federation Council had made a terrible mistake. 6 months had passed since the last Federation ship vanished into hyperspace, leaving humanity alone in the cold darkness of space. The Devourer advanced scouts had arrived exactly as predicted, their massive bioships sliding through the void like ancient predators returning to familiar hunting grounds. They expected to find empty worlds or cowering prey. Instead, they found something that defied millions of years of experience. Impossible, the Devourer Prime hissed through its neural network as the first scout ship exploded in brilliant fire. The abandoned species should have fled or perished. They cannot possess the capability to resist. Captain Robert Hayes gripped the command chair of the Defiance as his converted cargo hauler banked sharply away from the burning wreckage. 6 months ago, his ship had carried grain and medical supplies between the outer colonies. Now it bristled with weapons cobbled together from mining equipment and factory tools. All ships maintain formation, Hayes commanded into his headset. Remember, we're not trying to fight fair. We're trying to survive. Around him, dozens of similar vessels swarmed through the asteroid field where the Devourer scout had tried to establish a forward base. Passenger liners flew alongside garbage scows, their hulls cut open to mount weapon systems that no Federation engineer would have approved. Construction mechs designed for building space stations now carried explosive charges into enemy formations. Dr. William Foster watched the battle from the command center on New Birmingham, his weathered hands shaking as he clutched a cup of coffee that had grown cold hours ago. The data streaming across his screen should have been impossible. Human forces were not just surviving contact with the Devourers, they were winning. "How are we doing this?" asked Commander Sarah Blake, the woman who had taken over military coordination when the Federation abandoned their posts. "Their technology is millions of years ahead of ours." Foster pulled up the analysis he had been working on since the first attacks began. "That's exactly the problem. Their technology is millions of years old. So are their tactics. They've been fighting the same way for so long that they've forgotten how to adapt." On the main screen, another Devourer vessel died in a cascade of explosions as human fighters swarmed around it like angry insects. The enemy ships were massive, powerful, and incredibly advanced. They were also predictable in ways their builders had never considered. Engineer Lisa Thompson's voice crackled through the communication system from her position aboard a converted mining platform. "Hayes, we've got 3 more bogies coming in from Sector 7. They're bigger than the scouts." "Copy that, Lisa. Fall back to position 3 and let them come to us." Thompson grinned despite the danger. Her mining ship Rock Breaker had been designed to crack asteroids apart for processing. The same systems that could split apart a mountain-sized rock turned out to be devastatingly effective against enemy armor that had been designed to resist energy weapons and conventional explosives. The Devourers had conquered 1,000 civilizations, but none of those civilizations had thought to fight back using industrial equipment turned into weapons of war. None of them had packed civilian transports with explosives and rammed them into enemy formations. None of them had used communication networks to broadcast messages of defiance that somehow disrupted the ancient enemy's collective consciousness. "They're falling back," reported Lieutenant Colonel Mark Stevens from his position coordinating the ground defenses on New Manchester. His voice carried a mixture of surprise and grim satisfaction. "The landing force is retreating to their ships." Dr. Foster leaned forward in his chair, studying the tactical display with growing excitement. "They're not just falling back from the surface. Look at the fleet movements. They're pulling their entire advance force out of the system." Commander Blake stared at the screen in disbelief. "They're retreating? From us?" "It makes sense," Foster said, his voice gaining strength as the pieces fell into place. "Think about it from their perspective. For millions of years, every species they've encountered has either fled in terror or tried to fight them using conventional military tactics. We're doing neither." The truth was that humanity had never developed conventional military tactics on a galactic scale. The Federation had always handled large-scale warfare, leaving human forces to deal with pirates and minor conflicts. When the Federation abandoned them, humans had no choice but to improvise using whatever tools they had available. Captain Hayes brought his ship around for another pass at the retreating Devourer formation. Lisa, can your mining crews set up another asteroid bombardment? Already working on it, Thompson replied. We've got half a dozen rocks with guidance systems attached. Just give us a target. The Devourer Prime struggled to understand what it was experiencing. The abandoned species was using techniques that had never appeared in any of the collective memories stored in the vast libraries of consumed civilizations. They fought with an unpredictability that bordered on madness, turning every piece of available technology into a weapon. More disturbing still, they seemed to be learning and adapting faster than should have been possible. Each engagement saw new tactics, new weapons, new approaches that defied established patterns of warfare. Signal the main force, the Prime finally commanded. These creatures possess capabilities that were not predicted. Request additional resources for pacification protocols. But even as it sent the message, the Prime felt something it had not experienced in eons of conquest. For the first time in millions of years, the Devourers faced an enemy that did not behave according to the established rules of predator and prey. Dr. Foster watched the last Devourer ship disappear into hyperspace and allowed himself a small smile. They had bought themselves time, nothing more. The real war was still coming. But for the first time since the abandonment, humanity had hope. The warning alarms screamed across New Manchester's orbital defense platform as unknown ships dropped out of hyperspace near the outer system. Captain James Mitchell rushed to the command center, expecting another Devourer attack. Instead, his sensors showed something impossible. Federation ships were approaching human space. "This is Admiral Kethvier requesting permission to dock," came the familiar voice through the communication system. "I am not here as a representative of the Federation." Mitchell stared at the main screen in confusion. 3 Federation vessels hung in space beyond the asteroid fields where human defenses waited in ambush. They were smaller ships, escorts and transports rather than the massive warships the Federation typically used for military operations. "Kethvier?" Mitchell spoke into his headset. "What are you doing here? Your people made it clear we were on our own." "That is precisely why I am here, Captain. May I come aboard?" 2 hours later, Mitchell found himself sitting across from the Zalari ambassador in what had once been a formal meeting room. Now it served as a combination war room and engineering workshop, with weapon schematics covering the walls and half-assembled devices scattered across every available surface. Kethvier looked older than Mitchell remembered, his usually perfect uniform rumpled and worn. Behind him stood 2 other aliens that Mitchell did not recognize, their faces bearing the same tired determination he had grown accustomed to seeing in human survivors. "These are Commander Veltar of the Nexian Republic and Engineer Zeklos from the Outer Colonies," Kethvier said. "Like myself, they are no longer welcome in Federation space." Commander Veltar stepped forward, her warrior stance unmistakable even in the unfamiliar alien form. "My people were abandoned by the Federation 60 years ago when the Devourers last stirred. We survived by hiding in the deep void, but we never forgot what it felt like to be written off as acceptable losses." Engineer Zeklos, a small creature with 4 arms and skin that shifted color with his emotions, added his own story. "The Federation decided my colony was too remote to defend, too small to evacuate. We learned to fend for ourselves using salvaged equipment and determination." Mitchell leaned back in his chair, studying the 3 aliens carefully. "So you're all outcasts now? Because you decided to help us." "Because we decided that some things are more important than political convenience," Kethvier replied. "When I reported your victories against the Devourer advanced scouts, the Federation Council accused me of fabricating intelligence reports. They insisted that primitive humans could not possibly have succeeded where advanced civilizations had failed." Dr. William Foster entered the room carrying a data pad and wearing the same excited expression he had worn since the first successful battle. "Captain, you need to see these readings. Our new friends brought some very interesting information." Veltar activated a holographic display that showed star charts Mitchell had never seen before. "These are the locations of other abandoned species, other colonies that the Federation decided were not worth defending. Most of them are already gone, consumed by the Devourers or scattered to the winds. But some remain." "How many?" asked Dr. Emily Watson, who had been quietly observing from the corner. "Perhaps a dozen species across 30 systems," Zeklos replied, his skin shifting to a hopeful blue color. "Small populations, limited resources, but all with one thing in common. They have nothing left to lose," Mitchell said, understanding immediately. Engineer Lisa Thompson's voice came through the communication system from her position in the outer asteroid belt. "Captain, we've got incoming ships. Multiple contacts, various configurations. They're broadcasting human recognition codes. On the main screen, a ragtag fleet began to take shape as ships dropped out of hyperspace in groups of 2 or 3. Mitchell saw human vessels he recognized from the outer colonies, but also strange craft he had never encountered before. Some were clearly alien designs, while others appeared to be hybrid constructions that combined technologies from multiple species. Word travels fast in the abandoned territories, Veltar said with what might have been a smile. When news spread that humans had actually defeated Devourer forces in open combat, others began to take notice. Dr. Foster pulled up tactical analyses on his data pad. This is remarkable. Look at these ship configurations. Each species has adapted their technology in completely different ways. The Corvin use biomechanical systems, the Thek have mastered energy manipulation, and the Yill apparently specialize in stealth technology. All techniques the Federation considered primitive or ineffective, Kethvier added. All approaches that the Devourers have never encountered in their millions of years of conquest. Captain Robert Hayes appeared on the communication screen from his position aboard the Defiance. Captain Mitchell, we're getting reports from across the system. These new arrivals aren't just bringing ships. They're bringing ideas. Over the next several hours, the command center became a chaos of activity as representatives from a dozen different species shared their knowledge and experience. Each group had developed unique survival strategies during their abandonment. Each had learned to fight with limited resources against impossible odds. The Corvin had learned to grow their ships like living organisms, creating vessels that could repair themselves and adapt to new threats. The Thek had discovered ways to turn stellar radiation into weapons that could disrupt even advanced enemy systems. The Yill had perfected the art of invisible warfare, striking from shadows and vanishing before retaliation could be organized. Separately, we are all weak, Veltar said as the impromptu alliance meeting continued into the night. The Federation was right about that much. But together we represent every approach to warfare that the Devourers have never faced, Dr. Foster finished, his excitement barely contained. They've conquered advanced civilizations that all use similar technologies and tactics. They've never fought an alliance of survivors who learned to fight dirty. Mitchell looked around the room at the collection of outcasts and refugees who had somehow found their way to human space. 6 months ago, he had commanded a small defense fleet with obsolete weapons and no hope of survival. Now he found himself at the center of something unprecedented in galactic history. An alliance of the abandoned, united by necessity and bound together by the simple refusal to quietly accept extinction. The space around Titan's Rest had never seen anything like the fleet that gathered in its shadow. Captain Robert Hayes watched from the bridge of the Defiance as hundreds of ships took their positions for what everyone knew would be either humanity's greatest victory or their final battle. The vessels defied every rule of military formation that the Federation had ever taught. Human cargo haulers flew alongside Corvin bioships that pulsed with their own heartbeats. Thek energy manipulators hung in space like crystalline sculptures next to Yill stealth craft that flickered in and out of visibility. At the center of it all, General Michael Turner coordinated the impossible alliance from his command ship, a converted passenger liner that now bristled with weapons from a dozen different worlds. Remember, Turner's voice carried across every communication channel, they expect us to run. They expect us to hide. They expect us to fight like civilized species with proper military tactics and predictable strategies. We're going to disappoint them. 3 days earlier, Dr. William Foster had made the breakthrough that changed everything. Working with alien scientists who had been dismissed by their own species as too radical or too dangerous, he had discovered something hidden in ancient Devourer wreckage that previous civilizations had never thought to examine. Their neural networks, Foster explained to the assembled fleet commanders, are designed for perfect coordination across millions of individual units. But that same coordination becomes a weakness when disrupted. If we can create cascade feedback in their collective consciousness, their entire force will become confused and vulnerable. Engineer Lisa Thompson had been the first to understand the practical implications. It's like jamming a radio signal, but instead of blocking communications, we're broadcasting something they've never heard before. The something they had never heard before was pure human defiance amplified through every speaker system in the Allied fleet. Music, laughter, poetry, and simple messages of hope streamed across space toward the approaching Devourer hive ships. The ancient enemy had consumed the thoughts and memories of countless civilizations, but none of those civilizations had ever broadcast joy directly into their collective consciousness while simultaneously attacking them. Commander Veltar led the first wave of assault craft toward the massive Devourer formation. Her Nexian warriors had learned patience during their decades of hiding, but now they flew with the aggressive tactics that humans had taught them. Behind them came Captain Helen Wright with her squadron of converted transport ships, each one carrying enough explosives to level a city. The Devourer Prime felt the first stirrings of something it had not experienced in eons as the strange alliance approached. The broadcasts from the enemy fleet were unlike anything in its vast memory banks. Where other species had transmitted pleas for mercy or final messages of despair, these creatures sensed something incomprehensible. Unknown targets are broadcasting non-standard communications, reported a subprime through the neural link. Frequency analysis indicates celebration, emotional satisfaction. The patterns do not conform to established preconsumption behaviors. Ignore the broadcasts, the prime commanded. Deploy standard pacification swarms and prepare for feeding operations. But the standard pacification swarms ran into tactics that were anything but standard. Wright's transport squadron scattered like frightened prey, drawing the Devourer attack craft into the asteroid field where Thompson's mining ships waited in ambush. What looked like civilian vessels fleeing in panic suddenly revealed themselves as floating weapons platforms that had been modified beyond recognition. Now! Thompson shouted as her rock breaker opened fire with mining lasers that had been overcharged to military specifications. Hit them with everything. The Corvin bioships released clouds of living ammunition that sought out enemy targets with organic intelligence. The Thek manipulators turned nearby asteroids into guided missiles by wrapping them in energy fields that could be controlled from a distance. The Yill appeared and disappeared like ghosts, striking vital systems before vanishing again into the darkness. Dr. Foster monitored the cascade feedback from his position aboard Turner's command ship. The readings were unlike anything he had ever seen. "It's working," he reported with barely controlled excitement. "Their neural network is destabilizing. They're losing coordination across their entire formation." The Devourer Prime struggled to understand what was happening. Individual hive ships were reporting system failures, communication breakdowns, and navigation errors. Attack craft were firing on their own forces. Landing pods were launching toward empty space instead of target worlds. But more disturbing than the technical failures was the psychological impact of the enemy broadcasts. For millions of years, the Devourers had fed on fear, despair, and the final thoughts of dying civilizations. Now they found themselves experiencing something their ancient minds had no framework to process. The humans and their allies were not just fighting back, they were enjoying it. They celebrated each victory, mourned each loss, and continued fighting with an enthusiasm that bordered on madness. They treated warfare not as a grim necessity but as a challenge to be overcome through cleverness and determination. Captain Hayes brought the Defiance alongside a crippled Devourer vessel that was 3 times his ship's size. "Thompson, can you crack that armor plating?" "Already working on it," came the reply as mining charges detonated against the enemy hull. These old ships were built to resist energy weapons, not controlled demolitions. General Turner watched as the largest Devourer hive ship began to list to one side, its biomechanical systems failing as the cascade feedback reached critical levels. Around it, dozens of smaller vessels spun helplessly through space as their navigation systems crashed and rebooted in endless loops. "All units press the attack," Turner commanded. "They're vulnerable now, but it won't last forever." The battle that followed would be remembered as the moment when everything changed. Not just for humanity but for every species that had ever been written off as too primitive, too scattered, or too weak to matter. For the first time in millions of years, the Devourers were not the hunters. They were the prey. Fleet Admiral Marcus Campbell stood on the bridge of the Indomitable as the sleek Federation diplomatic vessel approached through the debris field that had once been the Devourer's stronghold. 3 months had passed since the Battle of Titan's Rest, and the galaxy was still struggling to understand what had happened. The impossible had become reality. The Devourers, unstoppable for millions of years, had not just been defeated but completely driven from known space. Their vast fleets lay broken across a dozen star systems, their ancient bioships cracked open like eggs by weapons that should never have existed. "Incoming transmission from the Federation Chancellor," reported Communications Officer David Park. "He's requesting permission to come aboard for formal negotiations." Campbell looked out at the mixed fleet surrounding his flagship. Human ships flew in formation with Corvin biovessels, Thek energy manipulators, and dozens of other craft representing species the Federation had written off as lost causes. The sight still amazed him even after months of working together. "Tell the Chancellor he's welcome aboard," Campbell said. "But he comes as a guest, not as a superior." An hour later, the formal meeting began in what had once been the Indomitable's cargo bay. Campbell had chosen the location deliberately. The room was filled with salvaged Devourer technology, captured weapons, and tactical displays showing the complete collapse of the ancient enemy's forces. Everything in the room proved that the impossible alliance had accomplished what the mighty Federation could not. Chancellor Mordak entered with his usual entourage of advisors and military officers, but Campbell noticed something different about the Federation leader. The arrogance that had marked their previous encounters was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like nervousness. "Admiral Campbell," the Chancellor began, his voice carrying formal respect that had been absent during humanity's abandonment. "The Federation Council wishes to acknowledge the extraordinary achievements of the Terran Commonwealth and its allies." Dr. Emily Watson, now serving as Secretary of Human Affairs, smiled coldly from her position at the conference table. "Achievements that your council said were impossible, if I remember correctly. We may have underestimated the resourcefulness of your species," Mordak admitted, clearly uncomfortable with the admission. "The Federation formally apologizes for our withdrawal of protection and offers immediate restoration of all previous agreements." Captain James Mitchell, who had been promoted to head of Commonwealth Defense, laughed out loud. "Protection? From who? We just defeated the greatest threat the galaxy has ever known, and you're offering to protect us." Kefe, now wearing the uniform of a Commonwealth admiral, leaned forward across the table. "Chancellor, with respect, you seem to misunderstand the situation. We are not requesting readmission to the Federation. We are informing you that we have chosen a different path." The Chancellor's advisors whispered urgently among themselves. This was clearly not the response they had expected. In their experience, abandoned species either died out quickly or spent generations begging for readmission to Federation protection. "But surely you understand," one of the military advisors interjected, "that your recent success was largely due to luck and desperation. Without Federation technology and guidance, you cannot hope to maintain your current advantages." Engineer Lisa Thompson's voice came through the communication system from her position aboard the rock breaker. "Admiral, should I tell them about the new mining operation we established in the Devourer graveyard? The technology we're recovering there is making Federation equipment look pretty outdated. Or maybe mention the defense contracts we've signed with 6 Federation border worlds?" added Captain Helen Wright from her converted transport. "Apparently, word is spreading about our unconventional approach to security." Dr. William Foster pulled up holographic displays showing the current political map of known space. Large sections that had been marked as Federation territory now showed different colors representing the growing Terran Commonwealth and its allies. "The reality, Chancellor," Foster explained, "is that your abandonment freed us to develop relationships that were never possible under Federation oversight. We've discovered that many species have capabilities that were overlooked or dismissed by your standardized approach to civilization." Commander Veltar stood up from her position at the table, her warriors bearing unmistakable. "My people survived 60 years in the void because the Federation decided we were not worth saving. The humans showed us that survival is not enough. They showed us that abandoned species can become something stronger than protected ones." The Chancellor looked around the room at the collection of representatives from species that the Federation had written off over the centuries. Each one wore the uniform of the Commonwealth, each one carried themselves with the confidence of beings who had faced extinction and won. "What do you want from the Federation?" Mordak finally asked. "Nothing," Campbell replied simply. "We want nothing from you except to be left alone to build something better. But if war comes again, then we'll face it the same way we faced the Devourers," Mitchell interrupted. "Together, as equals, using every advantage we can create or discover. We've learned that diversity of approach is more valuable than uniformity of technology." Emily Watson activated a communication link that connected them to Commonwealth worlds across dozens of star systems. Representatives from human colonies, Corvin bioships, Thek energy stations, and a dozen other allied species appeared on screens around the room. "This is what we've built, Chancellor," she said. "Not a hierarchy with some species protecting others, but a partnership where each member contributes their unique strengths to the common defense." The Federation delegation spent another hour trying to negotiate some form of renewed relationship, but it became increasingly clear that the old dynamic was gone forever. The species they had abandoned had not just survived but thrived in ways the Federation had never imagined possible. As the diplomatic vessel prepared to depart, Kethvier stood beside Campbell on the observation deck. "Do you think they understand what happened here?" Campbell watched the Federation ship disappear into hyperspace. "I don't think they can understand. They've never had to fight for survival the way we did. They've never learned that sometimes being abandoned is the best thing that can happen to you. Around them, the Commonwealth fleet continued its work, building something new from the ashes of the old.